Hey everyone, this is Zan, and welcome to Dominion 6 at a glance, featuring Patala, Reign of the Nagas. Their summary is that they are a nation of apes of uncanny brightness ruled by a mesmerizing naga. They feature versatile hordes of small monkeys, strong apes, elephants, and sacred naga warriors. Their capital mages are especially strong for the age, but outside of the capital, you're limited to astral nature mages. The nation is all about buffing their many sacred summons, and they can find a use for almost any gem if they find them in the late age. Patala features many light ranged infantry and a lot of variety in what kind of apes that you get. So they do have human sized infantry of varying styles, but the primary ones to focus on are going to be the Vanara swordsman, the light Bandar archer, which is very cheap longbow in the late age, the Bandar warrior with the two-handed cudgel. A lot of players like the light Bandar warrior because they throw 2 sticks and stones every time and have a lot of ammunition. But Patala also features elephants that can help with early expansion. They have a cave recruit sacred that isn't particularly good, but depending on your bless and as the game progresses, you might want these anyways. And then their actual capital sacred, a lot of people look down upon, but I think they're actually very strong and underrated. The commanders of Patala feature cheap forest recruitable scouts. They have a good armored commander in the Bandar commander with a lot of leadership. Their priests are kind of awful with the Brahmin, and in the capital you actually get a Holy 2, we'll talk about later. They do feature probably one of the cheapest astral mages in the game that is also sacred. It's important to note that the morale is awful, so most of the time after they cast Body Ethereal or something, you might want to relegate them to being communion slaves. Outside of the capital, they also have the Guru, which has now a lot more morale, but their combat speed is non-existent and their map move is very low. Now, focusing to their capital, they're going to be kind of reliant on the capital for paths outside of Astral and Nature. Starting with the Nagaraja, this is going to be your premier troop leader and Holy 2 priest. I think they're actually quite good, even though their paths don't say much, because your nation as a whole tends to have lower morale and issues shuffling their troops about. So early on, I do like getting a few of these guys. You also have the Nagini, which is kind of your versatility mage because it's still only 2 recruitment points, just like the Nagaraja is, and it's got a few more paths and can random into a wide variety of them. And finally, the Nagarishi, after a quick re-recording, is the primary capital mage for Patala, with fantastic water, earth, and astral magic, can join communions, although be mindful for the many different off-paths. Notably, they can cast Gifts from Heaven on their own without a communion, and you tend to use them a little earlier in the game than other capital mages because they focus on these elemental paths rather than all the sorceries of the late age. All of these commanders have a Naga form, but they can also shapeshift into a more human-like form, and this does give them some benefits. So in general, for all of them, they will all get 4 additional Met Move, they will lose 1 point in Water Magic, they will lose 4 Natural Protection, and they will lose Cold-Blooded and Swamp Survival. Now, for the Nagaraja, they're going to gain an extra star of leadership, meaning their morale bonus goes up to +2, and they can lead 50 more units. The Nagini will gain Stealth and Seduction, and the Nagarishi, they do get access to a feat slot now, so they can equip Earth Boots and make their Earth Magic even deadlier. So I'll be starting with the Patala non-national summons first. And the main thing about them is that you want to find a use for your water gems. So most of your Nagas can do Gelatinous Cubes straight out the gate, which are absolutely fantastic and do solve a lot of problems if you can get them to combat in time because of their low combat speed. It takes buffs very well. Water Elementals are listed here through the Water Bottle item. That's going to be fantastic if you're using your Nagini as seducers, but also just in general combat, Water Elementals are pretty good. Bishop Fish are a way to help you bless your many sacreds early on. Well, more of the mid-game, because again, your priests are not the greatest. And I do list Kokithiads here, even though they're extraordinarily hard to summon and might require empowering. But it's important to note that your Naga have Spirit Sight, and being able to cast Darkness might make your fights go a little bit better for you. So they're pretty good, and if you have magic weapons, they can also do Stygian Rains. So this is another one to try to focus on. Now, moving on to the actual summons, find a way to balance summoning everything else. The Garudas, the Kimpurushas, the Angiris, the age-old Gandharvas. And as the game progresses, and now you need to start getting some of your more late-game commanders, The Rudra is a crazy super combatant despite its small size and hit point pool. The Davala can do really good astral magic, and it can claim thrones, but better for that is probably the Siddha because it has teleport and can appear in any province in the world at any time. Continuing with their summons, they do have a lot. They have a lot of blood options, blood and death options, which are the longest summons. Now, almost all of these are fantastic, and you should definitely find a way into blood. Of note specifically, we're going to be the Dakini, which can help you expand your blood economy with their high blood magic. The Mandeha, which casts darkness on its own, is just overall a very powerful mage, but is variable very late. The Samanishada is another assassin, but your Nagini kind of fill this role already. That doesn't make this any worse, though. And one thing overall to note of all of the Lanka summons is that almost every single one of them is going to have a fire weakness. So if you are going to dive deep into blood with your build, you might want to keep that in mind. So moving on to the spell recommendations for the nation, we saw that in our roster, a lot of our units were lightly armored but high damage. And so most of our spells are going to either help protect our units, make it easier for them to hit the enemy, or increase their own offensive power. And so the premier spell of the nation for sure is going to be Body Ethereal, that almost all of their mages are going to be able to cast this. Quickness is really good because our units are lightly armored and so don't have as much encumbrance outside of our recruitable sacred. Strength of Giants is never bad, increasing the damage of all of our units, even our longbow archers. Wave Warriors is underlooked, just because it has a small radius, but the units that do get hit by it become much, much stronger. Well, they lose strength, but they are harder to kill. Barkskin is just the, bump up protection spell. Quagmire is going to be really good if you have a lot of Naga. Your Apes and some of your summons might not really like it, but if you do have a lot of Naga, this is going to be a good spell to cast. Moss Body used to be kind of the spell of the nation, especially for thugging purposes. It's not really good at thugging anymore, but when it comes to actually protecting your units, Moss Body is still really, really strong, and a lot of your Nagini can cast this. Now, coming new in Dominion 6, I didn't really know too much about these spells, but Winter's Chill and Crawl are fantastic debuffs. If your enemy doesn't have any frost protection, Winter's Chill is a no check happens, and it just gives them a -3 to their attack and defense, and fatigues them out a lot. Crawl makes them attack once every 2 turns instead of every turn, and also reduces their stats. Fantastic spells that the AI used on me, and I didn't even know about. And finally, a fan favorite. All of your Nagarishan can cast Gifts of Heaven, and that's always a great spell to cast. So, especially now that they leave creators. And now, moving on to the actual Pretender chassis, we're going to open up with the build I took at the end of Dominions 5, well, sort of translated to Dominion 6. And I took the Great Siddha due to its great map move, the inclusion of very strong air magic for Fog Warriors and Aerofend, and more importantly, Fate Weaving. So Fate Weaving has a very, very strong synergy with the Naga. I definitely don't have the time to explain it in details here, maybe another video, but just know that Fate Weaving and Hypnotize have a very interesting effect when you combine them. Now, into Dominion 6, I think I would change that build from using the Great Siddha and change to the Devi of Good Fortunes. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because although your mages can shapeshift out of their cold-bloodedness somehow, your units cannot, and now in Dominion 6, cold resistance, specifically 10 cold resistance, eliminates the cold penalties of cold-blooded. And so I think I would shift the build here. Now, I would be losing the teleportation capabilities of the Great Siddha and the air magic, but water magic is pretty good in Dominion 6, and now I get a Titan. Not saying that the 4-armed Great Siddha was bad at fighting, it was actually pretty good and did some crazy stuff. But a big Titan chassis is also not bad. Now, our traditional builds, where you take some sort of imprisoned wizard kind of thing, I actually like the Maharishi. And again, I think the cold resistance is important. I think larger is extremely synergistic with all of the sacreds in the nation because you have a lot of size 4 sacreds just begging to become 1 size more. Now, you can debate because larger is a spell you can actually buff, especially in the late game. I think there's a battlefield-wide version of it. But overall, I think it's a very strong bless for them because they tend to scale well with strength. Now, again, we have the cold resistance. The fire resistance I added because a lot of the Lankan summons have fire weakness, and this +5 here is not enough to really offset that, but it will help. And now, between this build and there's an alternative, this one has magic weapons, the alternative is using 5 times heroism, exact same build. The magic weapons one obviously gives you the magic weapons in the late game that may help you deal with certain tricks that opponents might use on you. The heroism one is going to fix a lot of the stat problems that maybe your sacreds have, because although they tend to be strong with good hit points, awe, and other things, they might not actually have really good attack and defense values. So the 5 times heroism is going to synergize a lot, not only with the sacreds, but also the reincarnation mechanic that some of your mages will use. And finally, our final pretender is actually a protector defender titan, the Asura. This is a build that a lot of players theorized kind of at the start of Dominion 6. I've never seen it used. I've never used it. And it's essentially combining Unholy and Thunder weapons because the Naga do have multiple attacks. Notable, the Poison Spit attack does not actually use any of these weapon blesses, so that's something to keep in mind. Outside of that, the Asura is going to be really good in combat, being able to magic phase places, Blood Hunt later. Just be careful that as reincarnation might give him some astral paths or potentially nature paths. So moving on to the gameplay, I highly recommend you practice the early expansion a lot. And when I say this, it's because often the first and second turn recruitment, the best ones is going to be just massing elephants, even if you don't recruit any commanders. Well, you need one commander to transfer the elephants to the second army, but as many elephants as you can get early on and reinforce that first army with them. After that, you can actually use the Naga warriors, even if you don't have a bless, but you really should. But I highly recommend start using Naga warriors with maybe some of the Bandor warriors, led by a Nagaraja, start getting them early. And prioritize taking over any cave systems, especially with your Naga armies. I wouldn't send the elephants into the cave, but your Naga armies for sure, they can go into the cave and do well. And then make a decision depending on who your first war would be on if you want massed melee with like the Cudgel Bandar, or if you want massed range where you have a lot of the Longbow Bandar and maybe some more disposable infantry that you don't mind losing to friendly fire. And always consider a cap circle fort with this nation, because your mages are really, really good and you really need to get your research online, but be mindful of the resources that your Naga warriors might be using. As you move to the mid game, keep in mind that your Yogi have really good mat move and low morale. Your Gurus have awful mat move, but high morale. So overall, your Yogi should be communion slaves before their script is over. My common script was either Body Ethereal 1 or 2 and then Communion Slave. I think that's a better script than just going straight Communion Slave unless you need to rush out a specific spell. Now, for your capital recruitment, you're really going to start struggling here because there's a lot of competition. But just know you don't really need Nagarishi early, as you don't have enough research to leverage their high paths. So I would focus on Nagini and Nagarajas early in the game. Probably a lot of Nagini because their human form can seduce, and that's really, really strong. You still want at least 1 or 2 Nagarishi just so they can site search early. And at some point in your mid game, you need to force blood. Either trade for it, blood hunt with commanders, whatever you need to do, just get into blood magic. Now, into your late game, forget your entire roster of recruitable units outside of the Nagas, because at the late game, that 8 magic resistance is going to be a huge issue when it comes to your Bandar, your Vanara, and so on. Don't forget with Astral and Nature, you can actually get to have some gateway mages, so like Astral 4 mages that just cast gateway and have like 200 leadership. You use items to get there. It's very useful to be able to move around because since your armies are a lot of summons, they tend to be a lot of summons and a lot of communions. They tend to be kind of focused on one spot, so you might be vulnerable elsewhere. And then hopefully in the mid game, you were able to get that blood economy going for even more sacreds, for even more good mages. And maybe now your astral gems, instead of going to units or summons, can go to some crazy spells, like I said, like Master and Slave. And I think that will be everything for Patala. Thank you all for watching.